Today is day 6 for the Come Follow Me study for this week, August 3rd through the 9th. Thou art come for such a time as this. Esther. Saturday, August 8th, 2026, Esther 9 through 10. Esther 9. The Jews slay their enemies, including Haman's 10 sons. Now in the 12th month, that is, the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them. For the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants and the deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter, and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan, the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and Parshandatha, and Dalphon, and Aspatha, and Paratha, and Adelia, and Aridatha, and Parmashta, and Arisai, and Aridai, and Vajezatha. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil laid they not their hand. On that day the number of those that were slain in Shusha the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, The Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done to the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. Or what is thy request further? And it shall be done. Then said Esther, If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews, which are in Shushan, to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey they laid not their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 70 and 5,000. But they laid not their hands on the prey. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a good day, and of sending portions one to another. Esther's courage led to a day of gladness. How has Christ-like courage given you a day of gladness? The Feast of Purim is instituted to commemorate their deliverance and victory. Esther 9, 20 through 28. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, she commanded by letters that this wicked device which he devised against the Jews should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as join themselves unto them, so as it should not fail, that they should keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. To celebrate their deliverance, the Jews established a new holiday called Purim. The name comes from the pur, lots, Haman cast to determine the date of the Jews' destruction. Today, Jews still observe the feast of Purim. Distinct from the quiet reverence of many other Jewish holidays, Purim is meant to be energetic and boisterous. It is celebrated with food, music, and other festivities, including exchanging gifts and giving presents to the poor. On Purim, Jews traditionally dress in costumes and gather at the synagogue, where the entire story of Esther is read and enacted. Those listening to the story will often drown out any mention of Haman with boos, hisses, or noisemakers. When the name Mordecai is read, the audience cheers. Esther 9:29-32. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews, to the 127 provinces in the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed, the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Esther 10. Mordecai the Jew stands next to Ahasuerus in power and might. Esther 10:1-3. And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. Having Mordecai near the king undoubtedly relieved the Jews of much oppression and gave them a favorable place in the empire. This good treatment may have been the reason most Jews elected to remain in Babylon rather than return to Judah when the opportunity came. Mordecai's situation is parallel in some ways to that in which modern followers of Jesus find themselves. For Mordecai, Babylon was a physical reality. He was forced to function in the midst of an alien society. Today, Babylon, or the world, is a spiritual reality. The standards of the modern world are increasingly alien to the values held by the disciples of the Savior. The challenge is to keep the values intact, and yet find ways, as did Mordecai, to be of service both to society and to Christ. Mordecai could not have done what he did if he had compromised his standards. Because he had prepared himself and was willing to become involved, he eventually became the chief minister of the king. Elder Neal A. Maxwell said, "The Lord in the Doctrine and Covenants tells us to be anxiously engaged in good causes. This suggests we cannot respond to all causes. We must be selective in the things we seek to do in terms of community and civic chores. But it also suggests we ought to devote a measure of our time and talent to do these things, for they do count on the scales of action as God sees it. The world is full of fads. The world is full of the marches of lemmings to the sea. The world is full of causes that lead into conceptual cul-de-sacs. Our task, therefore, is to be wise in the selection of good causes, using the scriptures and the modern prophets as our guide. Anne Morrow Lindbergh, in her book Gift from the Sea, says, "My life cannot implement in action all the demands of all the people to whom my heart responds. You will care for more things than you will be able to do things about. Wise selections of causes is one of the highest forms of the use of free agency that there is, and really one of the ways God tests our basic wisdom and our capacity to love." Esther means a star in the Persian tongue. How fitting a title for a woman who may have been there when the morning stars sang together and all the sons and daughters of God shouted for joy. Though the text does not mention any foreordination or calling for Esther, Mordecai's question, "Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" suggests that Esther came into the world to save God's covenant people. F. M. Barham wrote, "We fancy God can manage his world only with great battalions, when all the time he is doing it with beautiful babies. When a wrong wants righting, or a truth wants preaching, or a continent wants discovering, God sends a baby into the world." What about you? Have you ever stopped to contemplate what your own foreordination may entail? Consider these thoughts by Elder Bruce R. McConkie. We are quite well aware that Joseph Smith and Jeremiah and the apostles and prophets, the wise, the great, and the good, were foreordained to particular ministries. But that is only a part of the doctrine of foreordination. The great and glorious thing about foreordination is that the whole house of Israel was foreordained, that millions upon millions, comparatively few compared to the total pre-existent host, but millions of people were foreordained. It may be that your calling is not to save a nation or to lead one, but one thing is certain: you are now here not by chance, but by design. If you will, you have a role to play in building the kingdom that will eventually produce Zion and prepare for the second coming of Christ.